Live from London, this is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. I'm Lizzie Burden with your top stories. Delcy Rodríguez is sworn in as acting president of Venezuela as Nicolás Maduro declares his innocence during his first court appearance in New York. Meanwhile, Denmark's Prime Minister warns an attack on Greenland would break NATO, with allies sounding the alarm over President Trump's threat to take the island. Plus, a silicon surge powers Asian stocks to a record. CEO Jensen Huang says Nvidia's new AI chips are on track for release this year. Checking in on these markets, and we have global stocks powering ahead again today. Already gains in the Asian session, and we're set for marginal gains as well in the US and Europe. But what could change that picture? Today's risk events include inflation data in Europe and commentary from the Federal Reserve's Thomas Barkin later this afternoon. Let's set you up for the day ahead. We begin with our top story. Delcy Rodríguez has been sworn in as acting president of Venezuela after the capture of Nicolás Maduro, flashing warning signs that a new wave of repression has begun. At least 7 journalists and members of the press were detained yesterday on Monday, while a New York court saw Nicolás Maduro pleading not guilty to narco-terrorism charges. For more, Bloomberg's John Herskovits joins us now for more. John, what is the latest in Venezuela? What do we know about how it's going to be run?
Sure. We have Maduro is gone, but his system remains intact. We have his former vice president as the acting leader, and the government is pressing ahead with continuity and repression. So we have this in place. We have Maduro loyalists in key positions in the military, still running the military, the courts, the legislature, and the state oil company. And this is probably the way it's going to be for some time. Trump said that there'll be elections, but there is no date coming. If there are elections, it could be several months away. So we have this system in place, and we're seeing the repression that's going on. We have some patrols in Caracas. We have some of these right-wing vigilante groups that are also exerting control. There have been some protests, but they have been very small, and the government that was of Maduro is still running Venezuela now.
OK, and meanwhile in the US, we have Nicolás Maduro having his first day in court, and President Trump suggesting that the US could subsidize energy companies' investments in Venezuela's oil industry. John, did he give any detail?
Trump has said that he could subsidize some of these energy companies. He's looking about 18 months to ramp up production. But Bloomberg has reported that this is an optimistic situation, that it should take maybe about 10 years or so, $100 billion in investment. And with oil prices low, the amount of money it's going to take to really ramp up production in Venezuela, we aren't seeing oil companies raising their hand and saying that they want to be in there now. Chevron is the only major firm that has operations in Venezuela from the U.S. We haven't heard from ExxonMobil, but Bloomberg has a report that came out just a few minutes ago about many in the oil industry were looking at someone like Rodríguez to take control. They see her portfolio as a former foreign minister and oil minister, as someone who can work with the private sector and the government, as someone who may be amenable to manage the resources of the country. So the industry sees her favorably, and Trump is looking at political coercion, the threat of military force to get the government to run as he sees fit. But the government is still very much that of Maduro and of Maduro loyalists.
Bloomberg's John Herskovits, we thank you so much for that update. Well, of course, now attention turns to who could be Trump's next target after the capture of Nicolás Maduro. Denmark's Prime Minister claims that the NATO alliance would end if the US were to attack Greenland. Mette Frederiksen says that Donald Trump should be taken seriously when he says that he wants Greenland, putting Danish officials on alert after the raid on Caracas over the weekend. Let's speak now to Bloomberg's Copenhagen reporter, Sanne Vass. Sanne, thank you for joining us this morning. How have other NATO members responded to these threats from Donald Trump?
Good morning. Yeah, yesterday we saw a whole range of European leaders and officials come out and pledge support for Greenland and for Denmark. Now, as you might know, it's not the first time Donald Trump says that he needs Greenland for national security purposes. Last year, he repeatedly went out and made statements about this. And European nations have generally been on the side of Greenland and Denmark in this spat. Now, what's different now is of course, really the timing. It comes right after the raid on Venezuela. And Trump has also, for the first time, kind of put a bit of a timeline on it, said that we'll talk about Greenland in 20 days. And most of all, there's a sense now that it's not just talk. As you said, Mette Frederiksen has said that Trump means this seriously, and we have to take it seriously. Of course, that put allies in a potentially much more difficult situation. One thing is pledging your support when everything is fine, but should Trump actually use force in Greenland, it would, as Mette Frederiksen says, probably be the end of NATO, and it would really test the unity of European allies.
Sanna, when we're thinking about Trump's motives here, does the fact that the US has had the right to build military bases in Greenland and yet it still wants to own it show that this is not about national security, this is about minerals?
It's a very good question. I mean, there is, as you say, the US does have the right to build as many military bases as it wants in Greenland. That's according to a decades-old treaty with Denmark. The only thing it really has to do is inform Denmark and Greenland. Denmark's prime minister has said she's open to the US boosting its military presence in Greenland. So the big question is, why has the US not used this right if it is actually national security it's worried about? It's done so previously. During the Cold War, it had dozens of military installations in Greenland, but it scaled back and now only has one base. So it raises questions, are there other interests at play? People close to Donald Trump have been talking a lot about Greenland's critical minerals and vast natural resources. These are becoming more accessible with climate change as the ice is melting. Trump has pushed back on the claim that should be driving his interests. And what we're hearing from the Greenlandic side is, if critical minerals is what you want, why have you not invested in it? We've been open for business for a long time. We have investments from a lot of other countries, and a lot of mines with investments from Canada. China has also attempted to invest in the mineral industry in Greenland. Why has the US not done so? What interest exactly is driving Trump is difficult to say, but the message very much from Greenland and from Denmark is, regardless of whether it's the minerals or the national security, you can achieve your aims without taking control of Greenland.
Well, let's see if that message gets through. Sanna, thank you so much for your reporting. Bloomberg's Copenhagen reporter there, Sanna Vass. Well, turning to the market reaction to the geopolitics, let's bring in Bloomberg's Valerie Teitel now. Val, if we turn to Venezuela first, you had warned us yesterday that bonds there were set for more gains. How's the market reaction played out?
Look, we did see more gains in Venezuelan bonds, but it's nowhere near the reaction that it could have been. I think it's just another reflection that the questions over the leadership in Venezuela are still too big. The timeline for potential negotiations in order to resume payments of these defaulted bonds is just too long for Venezuelan bondholders to price in anything else. We're still trading well below recovery value on these bonds that have been defaulted now for over 8 years. We did have a 10-cent rally, but it's still taking them into the 40-cent range, which is still a highly distressed value for sovereign debt. Now, we did know that a group of creditors did meet yesterday to discuss potentially starting negotiations back up with Venezuela. But again, many of those cited a timeline that was around 18 months to 2 years until we could start seeing a resumption of payments on these defaulted bonds. Really, the same could be said for what's going on in the commodity sphere. Yes, Venezuela does have copper, gold, gold and oil, but really the timeline is just too long for the immediate commodity market to price it in. We saw that with oil yesterday. It had its best session in a week, and we're still up around 1.4% on WTI since Maduro's capture. A lot of questions, again, remain about how these U.S. oil majors, will they make this investment? Will they eager to make that investment? And even if they do, are we still looking at 10 years until we can see Venezuelan production ramped up? I also want to bring copper into this. Venezuela does have a huge resource capacity when it comes to their copper mines, largely untapped. But again, the copper market is trading off of things that are very different from that at the moment. We actually surged to record highs just in the overnight session, trading well above now $13,000 for LME copper. Again, the story is more immediate. The threat of U.S. tariffs have brought a lot of supplies, a lot of inventories, into the U.S., squeezing the rest of the world. And again, copper's undoubted role in this AI build out as an industrial metal are also adding to the tightness of inventories.
And yet all roads still lead back to Donald Trump, even if that way it's via the tariffs. Val, thank you for the update. That's Bloomberg's Valerie Teitel. Well, as I say, futures are pointing higher in the US and Europe. But let's turn to markets that are already trading. Winnie Su joins us now from Hong Kong to catch up on the Asia session. Winnie, what's happening where you are?
Yeah, so we are seeing Asian stocks extending that record rally for another day. And that has been really driven by how investors are shifting away from this crowded U.S. tech trade and into these more cheaper stocks in our region. And you can see that by looking at how the Asia infotech sector up about 1.7% today, actually outperforming NASDAQ by more than 5% so far this year. And also tech-heavy Kospi index here rising about 1.4%, and it's reversing earlier losses as we saw more buying from the retail investor. But flip the board and take a look at the Chinese market, because it's really been driving gains in the region today, specifically for some of these onshore benchmarks hitting key milestones today. We are talking about the CSI 300 hitting the highest level in about 4 years, and SH Comp here actually also headed for its highest close in more than a decade. And that has been really driven by the optimism around China's AI capability, and also more delivery when it comes to the policy stimulus, as well as some signs of recovery in terms of macro numbers. Now, we also flip the board and take a look at what's going on in the Japanese market, because it's a bit of a different story there. We're looking at bank stocks here up about 3%, leading gains in Japan, and that is mainly being boosted by the expectation for further rate hikes to come. And that's probably also why we're seeing bonds pairing some of the earlier gains after a solid demand coming from the 10-year bond auction. Back to you, Lizzie.
All right. Winnie, thank you so much. That's Winnie Xu in Hong Kong. And we're going to stay on that tech theme next. Coming up, Jensen Huang says that Nvidia's new AI chip is on track and in production. We'll bring you the details from his keynote speech at CES in Las Vegas next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. It's 6:16 a.m. here in London. Well, the Nvidia CEO Jensen Huang says that the company's highly anticipated new artificial intelligence chips are nearing release. Speaking at CES in Las Vegas, Huang said that customers will be soon able to try the Rubin semiconductors, which was expected to speed up AI development.
This is the Vera CPU. It's got 88 CPU cores, and the CPU cores are designed to be multi-threaded. But the multi-threaded nature of Vera was designed so that each one of the 176 threads could get its full performance. So it's essentially as if there's 176 cores, but only 88 physical cores. So these cores were designed in using a technology called spatial multi-threading. But the I/O performance is incredible.
We're joined now by Masahiro Wakasugi, Senior Technology Analyst for Bloomberg Intelligence. Good to see you. Just talk us through how groundbreaking these new AI tools that Nvidia has announced actually are.
Yes, good morning. And Nvidia showcased a very new Rubin platform. and that include CPU or GPU or other networking ICs. And we found that it's quite interesting to see that Nvidia is now seeing that AI model size is increasing like 10 times every year, and the token generation is around 5 times every year. And the Nvidia's whole new Rubin platform will handle that kind of AI computation going forward. And they are expecting still to launch the Rubin platform in the second half of this year. So I think it's pretty exciting to see that NVIDIA is on track to launch a new system. And that should be also very good news for the whole tech supply chain.
And Masahiro, what does it mean for the autonomous vehicle market? If you've got Nvidia working with Mercedes, how do they compare to rivals?
Yes, I think that it's really powerful. And when it comes to autonomous driving, it's really interesting because robotaxi market will expand going forward. And Bloomberg Intelligence published a really interesting story about the robotaxi last year, and that kind of the autonomous driving will accelerate the robotaxi market all over the world. And also the Mercedes might be able to differentiate its autonomous driving technology from other competitors. But if we look at the other aspect, AI inference market is also growing, including autonomous driving, and that will create very much big demand for the memory chips or some other networking chips. So in that sense, that should be quite interesting for the whole tech supply chain, including that the autonomous driving or even robotics, or maybe that will translate into the memory demand going forward.
OK, and we've also heard from the AMD CEO, Lisa Su, at CES. I wonder how much their new products, their new chips, could make a dent into Nvidia's grip on the market.
Yes, AMD is very much aggressively trying to catch up with Nvidia. And I think that probably AMD will not be able to break the current competitive landscape. I mean that Nvidia has built its strong ecosystem over the past 10 or even 15 years. And so I think that the Nvidia will continue to dominate the AI market. But at the same time, it's not a zero-sum game, and the AI market is expanding quite rapidly. So we think that the AMD could be able, could benefit from the AI expansion. And also, if we look at some other ASIC suppliers, I mean, including the Google's TPU or some other ASIC chips, these demand will also increase. So over the maybe if we look foreseeable future, probably the AI will benefit many tech companies, including Nvidia, AMD.
There's room for everybody. Masahiro, thank you so much. That's Masahiro Wakasugi from Bloomberg Intelligence there. Well, later on, Bloomberg's Ed Ludlow is going to be sitting down with Nvidia's Jensen Huang. He'll be on stage at CES with Siemens CEO Roland Busch to announce a new partnership. Don't miss that exclusive conversation with both CEOs at 6:15 p.m. UK time. Also a reminder that later this week, Bloomberg Tech Europe is looking at how the AI industry is being shaken up, how AI is shaking up music. Well, the episode features an exclusive conversation with the Grammy-winning artist will.i.am. That's at 8:30 a.m. UK time this Friday. Again, right here on Bloomberg TV. But coming up on Daybreak Europe, the US and over 100 countries finalise a deal exempting American companies from some foreign taxes. We'll get you the details next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. Good morning if you're just joining us. Now, for decades, the US's relationship with energy-rich Gulf nations has been focused on security. But under President Donald Trump, that has shifted. Let's take a look now at what changed.
For decades, the U.S. relationship with Gulf countries has been characterized by security guarantees, a large military presence, and occasional friction. But under President Trump, the focus has shifted to business. from oil production to major arms deals to AI and advanced chips investments. Trump's admiration of Gulf economies and, of course, their wealth is clear.
The whole world is watching the Middle East, and many are watching with envy. You have something very special going on.
That business-first approach was on full display during Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman's visit to Washington, D.C. in November, when the U.S. agreed to sell the kingdom F-35 fighter jets and named Saudi a major non-NATO ally. All while Riyadh continues to toe the line on Trump's push for lower oil prices. In May, the U.S. president secured about $200 billion in deals from the UAE and a record $96 billion Boeing order from Qatar.
It's the largest order of jets in the history of Boeing. That's pretty good.
At the heart of this agenda is America's crown jewel, technology. The Gulf's sovereign funds are investing heavily in AI as Trump pushes to export more U.S.-made chips to Gulf AI firms. But Saudi officials made clear their partnership is no longer exclusive.
I'm happy to say, as a Minister of Investment, as excited as I am here in the U.S. about attracting American investment, I'm excited about attracting Chinese investment.
Even as ties with Washington, D.C. expand, the Gulf states are also deepening their relationship with China across energy, infrastructure, and tech in a push for more strategic autonomy. So as a more transactional American foreign policy unfolds and loyalties across the Gulf split, can the U.S. remain the region's top partner?
Now to other top stories around the world. Saudi Arabia-backed forces have regained control of Yemen's strategic region of Hadramaut over the weekend. The fighting in Yemen has raised tensions between Abu Dhabi and Riyadh as the two Gulf powerhouses and US allies back rival factions in the country's ongoing civil war. Riyadh has accused the UAE of backing the STC's advance, but Abu Dhabi denies the allegations, saying it was withdrawing its forces, quote, on its own volition. Elsewhere, the US and over 100 countries have finalised an agreement exempting American companies from some foreign taxes. The deal excludes US-based multinational firms from the 15% global minimum tax negotiated through the OECD. It also effectively blocks other countries from imposing more levies on some foreign subsidiaries of US multinationals. In other news, Italy plans to back the Mercosur free trade agreement with a South American bloc of countries in a vote that will likely be the final major hurdle for the European Union to clinch the accord, which has been in the works for 25 years. Bloomberg understands that Italy is expected to reverse course and support the deal when EU ambassadors vote on the measure on January 9th. That would allow the EU to sign the treaty with the Mercosur countries on January 12th. And freezing temperatures are pushing up French power demand and prices, with a 24-hour strike by Électricité de France workers expected to tighten the market further. The latest industrial action comes as the cold weather has lifted electricity consumption to the highest in 5 years as people turn up their heating. Well, you'd better wrap up warm. It's cold here in London too. Coming up here on Daybreak Europe, Nicolás Maduro claims that he's an innocent man as he pleads not guilty in a New York court. We'll discuss the wider geopolitical implications of his capture next. That conversation coming up as we look at futures pointing higher stateside. We're looking at them up 0.2% for the Euro Stoxx 50. Stay with us. This is Bloomberg. Live from London, this is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. I'm Lizzie Verdon with your top stories. Delcy Rodríguez is sworn in as acting president of Venezuela as Nicolás Maduro declares his innocence during his first court appearance in New York. Denmark's Prime Minister warns that an attack on Greenland would break NATO as allies sound the alarm over President Trump's threat to take the island. Plus, a silicon surge powers Asian stocks to a record. CEO Jensen Huang says Nvidia's new AI chips are on track for release this year. Well, a very good morning if you're just joining us. This global stock rally continuing in these markets. Asian stocks on for a fourth day of gains and at a new record already. And it looks like we'll see stocks marginally higher in Europe and the US as well. Oil pretty steady here. Brent at $61 a barrel. It's had its biggest gain in a week already because traders really are weighing the outlook for Venezuela against this global glut concern that is still dominating the minds of traders. But Venezuela Venezuela very much dominating the front pages again today. If we turn to the Financial Times, they lead on the Venezuelan government launching a wave of repression in the wake of US capture of Nicolás Maduro. So there may be a new leader, but it seems the old repression tactics remain. If we turn over now to the Wall Street Journal, they're focusing on the oil industry angle. The paper reporting that the president of the US, Donald Trump, of course, has hinted to American oil executives roughly a month before ousting Maduro that something was going to take place. And then if we flip over to the Times of London, they're splashing on Maduro's court trial in New York, his innocent plea, his claim to be a prisoner of war, and also the condemnation by Russia and China of Donald Trump at the United Nations. You can get a roundup of all the stories you need to know to get your day going by looking at today's edition of Daybreak, which Termisol subscribers can find at DAYB Go. But let's dive into that top story. Venezuela's government has sworn in Delcy Rodríguez as acting president after the US captured Nicolás Maduro. Rodríguez saying that she would work with Washington to make Venezuela great again. In New York, Maduro faced a US court along with his wife, pleading not guilty to narco-terrorism charges. Their appearance sets off an extraordinary legal battle with major geopolitical ramifications. Bloomberg's Miles Miller has more.
Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro pleaded not guilty Monday in federal court in New York to charges that could keep him behind bars for the rest of his life. When he walked into the courtroom, he wished people Happy New Year, and at one point, someone screamed at him, and he had a loud outburst saying he was kidnapped. He and his wife sat wearing headphones and jail garb to listen to translation as Judge Alvin Hallerstein read the charges against him. When asked to enter a plea, Maduro said through an interpreter, "I am innocent, I am not guilty, I am a decent man, I am president of my country." There are 4 counts against him, including narco-terrorism conspiracy, cocaine importation conspiracy, and weapons charges. His wife faces 3 counts. If convicted, he's looking at life in prison. Starting in 2000, he allegedly moved loads under protection of Venezuelan law enforcement and became foreign minister in 2006, starting to sell diplomatic passports to traffickers. When they needed to move money back from Mexico, prosecutors said he arranged for government planes to fly under diplomatic cover, meaning that no one was checking what was on board. The indictment says he and his wife ran armed guard escorts to protect cocaine shipments. They maintain state-sponsored gangs, prosecutors say, to facilitate the operation. And when people didn't pay or threatened the business, they ordered kidnappings, beatings, and murders. And this is a massive scale. By 2020, the State Department estimated 200 to 250 tons of cocaine per year were moving through Venezuela. Also charged is their son, Venezuela's interior minister, and a gang leader. Maduro represented by Barry Pollock, the same lawyer who represented Julian Assange. The judge in this case ordered Maduro and his wife held without bail. Trial won't happen until 2027. They'll return to court on March 17th. At the courthouse in Lower Manhattan, I'm Miles Miller, Bloomberg News.
Well, there's been a measured response to Nicolás Maduro's capture from America's allies, but with Danish officials on alert after the raid on Caracas, Denmark's Prime Minister says that the NATO alliance would end if the US were to attack Greenland. Joining me now for more is Elisabeth Braw, Senior Fellow at Atlantic Council. Good to see you back in the studio, Elisabeth. Is Greenland President Trump's next target?
Well, it certainly sounds like it. We just don't know in what shape, but he has talked about Greenland since the capture of Maduro, which suggests that it is on his mind, and that's why the Prime Minister of Denmark, the Prime Minister of Greenland too, why they are so concerned, because as Marco Rubio, Secretary of State Rubio, likes to say, President Trump doesn't just talk, he acts, and that is an alarming perspective alarming reality from a Danish perspective.
Well, yeah, Trump's argument is that Denmark isn't spending enough to protect Greenland. Is that a more legitimate argument than the one he was making in 2019, that this is just a big real estate deal?
Well, the argument that he's making is that America needs Greenland, and he has repeated that again, and is an extraordinary argument, really, because different countries can say we need such and such region, which is exactly what Russia said about Ukraine. We need Ukraine. We want Ukraine. So it is a really difficult position for America's allies, and especially Denmark, to try to deal with. And when it comes to needing Greenland, the United States U.S. companies can invest in Greenland, in mines, in other commercial activities, and they can also increase their military presence because they already have a military presence, and Denmark has always been a generous host. So it is extraordinary to see these statements from Trump and others saying we need Greenland.
Well, yeah, we were talking about this with our reporter Sana Vass earlier. The US has had the right to build those military bases since 1951. If it was really about national security, surely they'd just do more of that. Does it mean it's really about minerals?
I think it's about the fact that somebody has come up with this idea that America needs Greenland, and then once that has entered the minds and thinking of leading American officials in this administration, including Trump himself, it's difficult to then say, well, actually, we didn't really mean that, and we'll just do business instead. We'll increase our presence, and so it's almost like it's an idea that's taking on legs or sort of a sense of inevitability. And so now, having floated this idea for such a long time, I think Trump almost feels like he has to act on it, which is what's making it so risky for Denmark.
And what about the Danish leaders warning that if Trump were to attack, then it would be the end of NATO? Is that hyperbole? Or, I mean, even if Trump doesn't attack Greenland, if his threats continue to ramp up, is the alliance already dead?
Well, she's stating a fact, which is that if there is a geopolitical conflict between two members of NATO, then NATO essentially ceases to function.
By definition.
By definition, and we have been concerned about this for years when it comes to Greece and Turkey, but they've managed to coexist and restrain their geopolitical disagreements. But to see this reality beginning to take shape between the United States, which is the corner nation of NATO, and Denmark, which is one of the most committed, loyal members of NATO. It is extraordinary.
But of course, breaking away from Denmark has long been discussed in Greenland. If that were to happen, hypothetically, would you see it as inevitable that Greenland would become part of the US?
The basis of all determination of where to which country a region should belong is that region itself, and that's why it matters so much what the Prime Minister of Greenland says. He may not represent a lot of people, but he represents a region that, like any other region in the world, any country in the world, has the right to self-determination. And he says, we decide that ourselves.
So, Elisabeth, what cards can Denmark play right now?
It can play the card of international law, the United Nations Charter. It is a country that abides by international law, by the rule of law domestically, of course, as well. And I think a lot of countries can identify with Denmark. No country would want a region, a part of that country, to be taken away by another country, or even the thought being entertained by another country that country should have the right to take a region or a part of that country.
I just want to end with a question that we've had sent in from a viewer, which, by the way, you can do at IBTV Go on the terminal. It says, does Trump quietly want the end of NATO, Elisabeth?
He doesn't. It's an excellent question. Well done to your viewer. He has never really liked NATO very much because it is one of those organizations, institutions that are based on multilateral negotiations, meetings where you have a give and take and so forth. That's not his style. I think he very much likes NATO for what it can produce, for what it does produce, for the strength it has. But he certainly, through his words and actions, in the first administration, especially now in his second administration, has undermined NATO. I don't know whether that has been deliberate or not, but this talk about taking Greenland certainly undermines NATO even more, because we have to remember Russia is watching, China is watching, and when they see division within NATO, they see an opportunity to exploit that.
Okay. Could inspire more from those leaders as well. Elisabeth, really great to get your insights this morning. Thanks so much for coming in this early hour. That's Elisabeth Braw, Senior Fellow at Atlantic Council. Well, the French president is going to be hosting Ukraine's allies in Europe and the US for talks today. That's in the hope of finalising a security agreement which could see American boots on the ground after the end of the conflict with Russia. Let's get more now with Greg Sullivan, Bloomberg's Russia economy and government editor. Greg, good morning. How have Trump's actions in Venezuela and the threats on Greenland that we've been discussing changed the Ukraine talks in Paris and the conversation around the role that the US and Europe is going to play in post-war Kyiv?
Well, that is a great question. This is certainly going to be on the minds of many European leaders. In a lot of ways, it underscores their worries and, in fact, a certain reality that they're faced with and trying to contend with. And that is that Europe is struggling for a seat at the table. And the Trump administration does not believe it needs to be at the table. It does not believe it needs to consult Europe. We saw that in the case of Venezuela. We see it with Ukraine and in previous negotiations. Europe has been trying to insert itself into the dialogues, into the negotiations, and keep their place at the table because they see Ukraine as being fundamentally tied up with their security infrastructure. This underscores that. And it also makes the talks a lot more difficult because of the threats against Greenland. That's an element of Europe that, you have on one hand the US dismissing Europe and on the other being somewhat hostile toward Europe. That's very concerning and is likely to make the talks more difficult. There's also, on the other hand, a sense of urgency that this injects. If Trump is suddenly distracted by Venezuela, Western Hemisphere issues, will his attention remain on Ukraine? European leaders are struggling to keep the U.S. focused and involved in the Ukrainian process. That's very important for them, and that will be important in this meeting, especially with everything else going on.
All right, Greg, thank you so much. That's Bloomberg's Greg Sullivan. Well, coming up on the programme, a mix of serious business and show business. How stock exchanges are pulling out all the stops to attract IPOs. We'll bring you that story next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. Now, the British Retail Consortium says that UK food inflation rose for the first time since August last month, nudging shoppers to seek value items during the key Christmas trading period. Food prices rose 3.3% from a year earlier in December, up from 3% the previous month. That drove an uptick in overall shop price inflation to 0.7% year on year, as non-food prices continued to drop. In other news this morning, new car sales in the UK have surpassed 2 million for the first time since the pandemic, buoyed in part by automakers offering more discounts on EVs. The Society of Motor Manufacturers and Traders says registrations rose 3.5% last year, with sales of fully electric models climbing around a quarter. EVs now account for 23% of the market, but that's short of the government's mandate for 28% of sales. And more than half of British companies' finance chiefs expect artificial intelligence to deliver a growth boost. It's a sign of rising optimism over the technology's potential to transform the economy. Accountancy firm Deloitte found 59% of UK chief financial officers expect AI to improve the performance of their own company, up sharply from 39% when they were last asked in the third quarter of 2024. Well, those are some of our top stories this morning. It's usually the culmination of years of effort readying a privately held company to sell the shares for the first time. The big day finally arrives with an initial public offering. Stock exchanges covet IPOs, of course, for the business they bring and the prestige. And many pull out all the stops to make the first day of trading a day to remember. Our very own Tom McKenzie reports on the growing competition for those deals.
An IPO is often the pinnacle of success for executives. There are speeches, hugs, even tears.
I achieved my dream.
The champagne and confetti and countdown clocks might look like a nice party, but it's serious business too. Listings have been dwindling in recent years in the aftermath of COVID and rate hikes to tackle inflation. Exchanges have been competing for a shrinking slice of that pie, and a good show is part of the marketing.
Part of getting the message out is a way that we effectively live the stories that the companies execute through the medium of an exchange. And yes, of course, it reaches out to companies which may be within an IPO pipeline.
Asia has dominated listings for the last few years, and its listing ceremonies mix tradition with pomp and some fun. In Hong Kong, there are gongs of different sizes.
So there's the standard size gong. We also have a bigger gong or a mega gong. That's for very special and larger companies listing Hong Kong.
So, little surprise then that when China's CATL sold shares in May, raising a whopping $5.3 billion, no ordinary ceremony would do for the world's biggest maker of EV batteries. The Hong Kong Exchange wheeled out its mega gong. With CATL shares handily beating global benchmarks since the listing, fortune has indeed been kind to the company. As Europe and the US look to rival Asia by claiming more new listings, the pizzazz, showmanship and company mascots show no signs of being canned as trading gets underway.
Tom McKenzie with that story. Well, for more on this, I'm joined by Bloomberg's European Capital Markets editor, Charles Capel. Charles, Happy New Year, first of all. Look, 2025 was a year of two halves for IPOs, wasn't it? You had a pretty slow start, bit of tumbleweed, and then a real pickup towards the end. What was driving that?
Yeah, well, IPOs are really, really delicate things. And for an issuer, for the bankers, for the advisors to be confident enough to go ahead, market conditions need to be right. And volatility really doesn't help with that. So when the US tariffs hit in the first half of the year, that put off a lot of issuers from going ahead with their IPOs. Then when things started to calm down in the second half of the year, especially when European equity benchmarks started to pick up towards the end of last year, that encouraged more and more companies to come to the market, particularly in the US, particularly in Europe. You know, we had Klarna and Medline in the US. Medline was the biggest IPO in the world last year. In Europe, we had Verisure, Ottobock, a handful in London, and so more and more were coming towards the end of the year. The one exception to this rule was Hong Kong, which basically just kept on trucking throughout the entire year. They had a crazy year for IPOs, hosting CATL, which was an enormous offering and one of the biggest of the year, and their volume as a whole was very, very impressive.
Yeah, and you had Baidu's AI chip unit just picking Hong Kong most recently. So as we look ahead into 2026, you mentioned volatility. Doesn't look like Donald Trump's planning a quiet year ahead. What's the outlook for IPOs?
Yeah, exactly. It is very much dependent on volatility. At the moment, it looks really good. Bankers before Christmas, they were very, very optimistic about the year ahead. A couple of things that they were worried about, maybe an AI bubble, whether that emerges and bursts, or perhaps the US midterms creating a little bit more volatility. The question is whether these big geopolitical events, do they spread into equity markets? Do they cause a rise in the VIX index? On the whole, people seem pretty calm at the moment. But as you said, it doesn't look like it's going to be a particularly quiet
It's
year.
the 6th of January, Charles. There's room for volatility. Look, who are the biggest candidates in Europe that we should be watching as maybe listing this year?
Exactly. So there's a really, really interesting defence theme that's coming through. So CSG, which is a Czech company, and KNDS, a Franco-German tank maker, they are both looking at IPOs in Europe this year. Now, these are both key companies for arming the war in Ukraine, and they are also sort of key European defence companies. So they're set to win from increased European defence spending. As a result, they're looking to tap equity markets. It will bring them some credibility. It will allow them to sell some shares and let some of their shareholders cash out, especially with those defence indexes and those defence stocks really at all-time highs. The other key companies are around Visma and Novoy Mining. Visma is a software company. Novoy Mining is a Uzbekistan company. They are both looking at IPOs in London this year. So two really interesting candidates. These are big companies as well, multi-billion-dollar companies. So will be really significant offerings.
And indeed, we saw gains for already listed defence names yesterday off the back of the geopolitical tensions. Charles, good to see you. Bloomberg's Charles Capel there with the outlook for IPOs. Plenty more coming up. This is Bloomberg. In our last couple of minutes here, I just want to leave you with a couple of charts to set you up for your day ahead. We've had copper smashing through that $13,000 a tonne level. This on the threat of import tariffs from President Trump, hence the premium that US copper is trading compared to the London Metal Exchange. But it's not the only metal that the president has been influencing. Flip the board over and we can take a look at gold and silver. Again, rallying, but this time on the geopolitical risk because of the capture of Nicolás Maduro. So you can see that there, but contrast it to what we've seen in the oil market, and you've got a bit of a gap opening up between oil and gold. Flip the board over one more time, and we've got the global glut concerns dominating when it comes to the oil market. You can see oil here in the white line, gold in the blue line. Really, when it comes to oil, the geopolitical risks around Venezuela, not the dominant theme, perhaps as well because Venezuela has less production than it did have. You've had production diminishing since 2015, even if it's got the biggest reserves in the world. A quick look at today's risk events. They include the inflation data in Europe and commentary from the Federal Reserve's Thomas Barkin this afternoon. And later, don't miss our exclusive interview with the CEOs of Nvidia and Siemens from CES in Las Vegas. But before all that, the opening trade's up next. Anna, Guy and Tom will take you all the way to the European market open. See you tomorrow here on Daybreak Europe. This is Bloomberg.